Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Atlanta. I'm representing Georgia State University, which is just about 3 miles from here. It's in downtown Atlanta, and that's part of the story I want to tell. Georgia State is a 4-year research institution, but its student body is very atypical of that national profile. There are Pell numbers since the onset of the recession. We have almost 60% of our students on Pell. Over the last 10 years, we've moved from a population that was 60% white to one that now is 62% non-white. Our fastest growing populations are our Latino students, about 40% first generation college students. So this is a campus in which the students are facing many of the same problems that the students face on your campuses and on campuses across the country. Indeed, these are the target students for trying to get to succeed because they're the ones that basically American higher education has failed over the last generations. We're not a well-resourced university. Georgia State has a very small endowment. It is not a particularly wealthy place as far as resources, faculty, staff, and otherwise. So we've had to be very aggressive about using data in order to identify the problems and hone what we want to do. We've been very willing to innovate early, to try things out. We admit publicly and often that we are doing things very poorly at times, that we're not serving our students adequately, and we need to find solutions. And that public admission of fact often leads to ideas coming up from staff members, coming up from faculty. We're willing to pilot those or steal from others nationally, but we're also willing to admit when those experiments don't work, revise them. And I think the real difference between Georgia State programs and programs at a lot of other universities nationally is that we're willing to scale. In fact, we're only piloting programs that we can envision a way that we could put into place to impact not 20 students or even 120 students, but thousands of students. And that is part of the message I want to convey this morning, is that these sorts of programs, although they're complex and they use technology at times, are not necessarily expensive. In fact, your institutions would be better served by implementing these programs effectively than by sticking with the status quo if what you're concerned about is the bottom line for your chief financial officer on campus. Let me give you a couple examples, and there are about 16 of these different programs that we have in place, and I'm just going to talk about 3 this morning. I'll have some time later today to talk in greater depth. But Stan was talking earlier about setting up defaults for students. And that's what we've tried to do at Georgia State, to use analytics to identify what will serve specific students well and then create defaults. The Summer Success Academy is one example. We're using analytics now before the students take their first class to develop profiles of which students are likely to succeed and not succeed. These are not remedial students. These are students who meet college requirements, but by looking at high school records and comparing like students and how they've done in the past, we've been able to determine which students are at risk. And now, rather than admitting them to the fall semester and waiting for the almost inevitable to happen, in most cases they'll collect D's and F's and start to struggle, we send them a very different admissions letter. We say, welcome to Georgia State for the fall, with one condition. You have to come for a 7-week session during the summer. You'll get a head start on everybody else. These are not remedial courses. You'll pick up 7 credit hours. But we will throw every bit of support that we have available at you. And when you talk about financial efficiencies, the summer is a great time to do this because most of your support staff are 12-month employees. Most of your enrollments are lower in the summer. At Georgia State, they're about half. 32,000 students in the fall and spring, 16,000 in the summer. So we have more people to help these students out with tutoring, with supplemental instruction, with advising, with financial literacy, and so forth. And the difference that this program has made is absolutely huge. That these students who we were seeing being retained at 40% and 50% rates are now being retained at a close to 90% rate. And they are getting strong grades in the summer semester with all the support, and then actually outperforming the rest of the freshman class for the rest of the academic year. But they don't have a choice in the matter. They are funneled into this program. There are mostly low-income students. I can talk this afternoon about how this works from the students' perspective as well, because given new Pell rules, as they are admitted into the new year, it's the only time that they can have 3 consecutive semesters of Pell funding, because the summer counts as the last semester from the previous funding year, and their freshman, fall, and spring will count as funding for the next semester. Freshman learning communities, another low-cost way of directing students into these default pathways. The students select one of the meta majors that you see at the top of the screen, And they are given a block schedule. They are not told to go pick whatever 5 or 6 courses you would like. They are handed a block of courses that we know will serve all the majors within each and every one of those meta majors. And we're not giving freshmen a choice about whether to go in freshman learning communities or not. At least we're making the default choice being that you're in a freshman learning community. And if the students have a reason, by the fact that they come in with a lot of AP or advanced credit and so forth, to have a different model, then we'll accommodate that. But the assumption is they're in. And these are not costly programs. The basic message and impact of freshman learning communities as we do them is just organizing the students into 25 student blocks and making sure they take all their classes together. They're certainly not taking classes that only have 25 student enrollments. We can't afford that. But those same 25 students are in a 75-seat American government course. And they build a friendship, study partners, a connection amid a big state university. You see some of the results there, that the grade performance, retention rates, and all are much stronger. Now, we've been talking a lot about maps and their impact. Here's a problem we were having on our campus, and it may be a problem you have as well. We did a study, and we determined that about almost 100% of our advisors' times were going to students whose trajectory were not being materially impacted by the advice of the advisors. Because the advisors were overwhelmed with student demand and responding to students as they came in, they were working at one end of the spectrum with the A students who needed every T crossed and I dotted, we wanted to make sure that they had done everything right, and spending a lot of time with those students. And the reality is those students would have graduated whether they got that advice or not. The other cohort they were dealing with, and you won't be surprised by this, were the students whose GPA had dropped below a 2.0. They were required to come in on a regular basis and see the advisors. And the sad reality is, as we looked at the data, very few of those students' trajectory changed for the better. And what we realized is that there was this huge group in the middle, the B and C students, who by a right decision, a right nudge, help at the right time, might be turned from college dropouts into college graduates. And we were seeing very few of those students. So how could we go about actually targeting our resources to where they'd have the most impact? Data was helpful here as well. This is actual data from Georgia State, and I'm almost positive would be very similar for your institution. What we found across the board is that there was great predictive value to the first grade that a student gets and what becomes his or her major. So in the middle of the chart there, you can see for students who get an A and B in their first political science course and are or become political science majors, they're graduating from Georgia State at above a 75% clip. They get a C in that first course, and they graduate at a 25% clip, a 50% drop. Now, it's not surprising for all of us in this room. We're all educators. We can imagine if you get a C in your most introductory course in political science, you probably have some issues that need to be dealt with, reading, verbal, personal, financial, that need to be dealt with before you move on. But what do 99% of the universities in the United States do with that student who gets a C in their first course? Absolutely nothing. And that's where the intervention might actually help. If you can get them help at that early stage before they collect D's and F's in their upper level courses, you're going to give them a much better path to success. That's where we collaborated with the Education Advisory Board. We're members of the Student Success Collaborative, and there are representatives from the Ed Advisory Board here today who can tell you more about the system. But we used 10 years worth of our RPG data, over 2.5 million grades. We have this system updated on a nightly basis. And what we've worked on is creating predictive analytics for how every student will do, every individual student will do in every major and many courses, many milestone courses at Georgia State. We have over 700 different alerts like the one you saw on the previous screen. The political science student gets a C in their first course, an alert goes off, and there'll be an intervention. The system looks like something like this as it plays itself out. This is one student whose alerts have been going off. It's a sad case because when we turned the system on in 2012, we retroactively went back and traced how many mistakes we at Georgia State had been making with regard to our students. This was a pre-med student who his first semester needed to sign up for chemistry, didn't do so. Needed to get a minimum grade according to our analytics in his first math course. Took the math course but got a C-. He was off track from the beginning, but we did absolutely nothing to help him. If we had intervened during that first semester to try to get him on track, to get him stronger math skills, then he might have had a chance of being a successful biology major. But what you see as you scroll through the live version of the screen is he's digging himself deeper and deeper into a hole. because the C- that he gets his first semester turns into Ds and Fs, and by the time we turned on the system and tried to help, he was a lost cause for biology. So another feature is this major matcher. This is the same student, but what it does is in the shaded area, take the courses that the student has already taken that apply to that particular major and list the grades that the student has received, and then in the white area, the remaining required courses for that major with the predictive analytics for how the student will do. And we're now having very structured discussions with students who are struggling in a major about what alternate pathway they should take. Tristan was just talking about informed decision. Here's an ultimate informed decision and an ultimate case where we have been letting our students down. They come into our offices struggling as a pre-med student, and we tell them, pick something else. Why not sociology? Well, why not give them the information that they need to make an informed choice? And with thousands of students, we found that this is critical. They find this is treating them as adults and giving them the information they need to make an informed choice. Here's what happened during the first 12 months live with this particular system of these alerts going off. We had over 33,000 instances of alerts prompting a dialogue between a staff member and the student, in most cases working to get the student back on track. Some of these things are really simple, but things that we're not taking care of on our campuses, like students signing up for the wrong course, and we don't find out about it. They signed up for the wrong biology sequence for biology majors and so forth until after the semester is over. Now we're getting students in the right class before the first day of class. Over 6,500 students changed their major as a result of the system. And what we found is that at an earlier time period, even though we're dealing with first generation students, the information they get from the system and the advisement that they're getting is allowing them to make choices earlier on and make informed choices that, at least according to the analytics, should put them on a better path for graduation. Talk about retention rates. Here's the difference. The 2 baseline years before we went live are highlighted in red, and then the 2 years we've had this system up and running in white. Look at the difference about the 1 year, actually the first semester retention rates from fall to spring semesters. We've had a 5% increase. Well, why should you care about that? Well, we care about our students, obviously, but we also care about the bottom line, and you have to make the practical arguments on your campuses. This is the practical argument from a Georgia State perspective. Every 1% increase in retention rate at Georgia State with over 32,000 students is about 300 plus students. The average tuition and fees generated by a student at Georgia State over the course of a 12-month period is about $9,800. That's millions of dollars in additional revenues we're getting, about $3 million for every 1 point we increase the retention rate. So looking back at that previous slide, that not only looks good for me as the head of student success programs on campus, it looks awfully good to our chief financial officer as well, because those are students whose revenues will not be lost to the university. This is another indicator of the impact of the system. The 2 baseline years, only about 55% of Georgia State students over a 12-month period were improving their chances of graduating. They were taking courses, but they were often getting Fs and Ds or Ws in required courses and setting themselves back. With these kind of trackings going on, we've raised that number to 71%. It's gotten us a lot of national attention, which is obviously great, but here's the real satisfying part of all these efforts. These are the degrees we've conferred at Georgia State over the past 5 years. We're now conferring 1,700 more degrees every year than we were just 5 years ago. We've actually had to move our graduation from the basketball arena to the Georgia Dome where the Falcons play. That's where graduation, that picture was taken, because we don't have room anymore for all the graduating students and their families. And over that same time period where we've increased conferrals by 30%, we increased the inputs, we increased the students who enrolled by 3%. So these programs are making real big difference in succeeding with the students we have. Here's my final slide, but it's an important lesson as well about these programs. What we've found, and it does echo something that Tristan was saying about closing the achievement gap, that these types of interventions work effectively for all students, but they work even more effectively for the students who are most distressed and greatest at risk to start with. So what you see with the blue bar on this chart is where we were 10 years ago with our graduation rates for each of these groups. And what you can see is Georgia State was doing very poorly overall. We had a mediocre, unacceptably low graduation rate, but we also had an unacceptable achievement gap. The white students were performing at a significantly better rate than the African American and Latino students. And what has happened, the red bar represents our current numbers. Look at those 10-year gains. Those are huge gains in a relatively short period of time. But look where the strongest gains were made. The biggest leaps were for our African American and our Latino students. The green line represents something I recommend you do if you're not doing it already, especially if you have large numbers of low-income students enrolled, and that is track out your cohorts using National Student Clearinghouse data. We did that with the red cohort, and those are the numbers we got back. The students who, even those who leave, and low-income students are far more transient than middle-class and upper-middle-class students. Their parents, they lose jobs, gain jobs, move around, and so forth. That the students who started with us, even if they didn't succeed with us, are succeeding at other institutions at very, very high rates. Just as a comparison, the difference between the green bar for the University of Georgia, the flagship in Georgia, and the red bar is about 3 to 4 points. The difference between the green bar and the red bar at Georgia State is over 20 points. So these programs are game changers, as Stan said. They can make a huge difference, and they make a huge difference to the whole scope of your student population. And the nice bonus for many of us is they can actually add to the bottom line, to the income that comes into your university, and more than pay for themselves.